Hello and welcome to the How to Get Started in Web Design seminar. In this seminar, I'm going to show you how to get started creating web pages. And before we get started, let me introduce myself real quick. My name is Dan Rodney. I'm an instructor here at Noble Desktop, and we teach people how to design and code. So creating websites is one of the things that we teach people. And that's what we're going to start learning in this seminar. Before we dive in and actually get started coding up a web page, just have a few things to cover conceptually, and that's going to put us in the right frame of mind. Also, as far as creating the actual web page that I'm going to be demonstrating, we've written a step-by-step exercise, which you can download that PDF right here. I've already done that, so let me switch over here. This is a PDF that you can print if you want, or you can just read it on screen. It has the information to go to our website and download the class files, and it's got all the steps written down here for you step by step. This follows the same format that we use in a lot of our classes where we include step-by-step workbooks. So if you want to repeat what I'm showing in the seminar after I'm done showing you, you can go through this exercise and you can code up your first website, and it'll walk you through step by step. So make sure you get that after you're done watching this seminar. The presentation in here, this is the address right here, nobledesktop.com/presentation/web-design, and we keep this presentation up as well. It's possible that might be updated in the future if we do change things with the seminar, because we do have this as an ongoing seminar. In this presentation, you can click the arrows down here at the bottom right, or you can use your arrow keys or swipe on the screen if you're on a touch screen device. So without further ado, let's go in and get started here. So just so we understand before we actually start creating the website, a few things about web design. Websites need a few things. We're going to need a design for the web page, and we're going to need graphics. And finally, we're going to need code to make the website actually function. So how do we go about doing this? Well, first of all, when it comes to code, you might be saying, I don't want to learn to code, I just want to design. But definitely learning something about coding is going to make you a better designer. If you don't believe me, here is a quote from Fast Company where they say, learn to code. Even if you don't intend to code, knowing how to code will make you a better designer and a stronger candidate. So this is a third party that maybe you'll trust a little bit better than my word, but I thoroughly believe that if you know something about how a website is coded, that is going to make you a better designer. Every website needs both design and code to function. The more you know about how these two things work together, the better designer and also developer you're going to be. Developers that understand the design side have a better understanding of how to build a website, and designers that have a better understanding of how the developers code the website, they will be better designers. For me, I know both design and I know coding, and I can't imagine designing a website without understanding how that website's going to be produced. So coding is what we're going to be going over today, and showing you how to code up a website and build it, and hopefully show you that it might not be as scary as maybe you thought once you dive in and actually start to understand what these things do and how they actually work. So there's different types of coding. First of all, there's what we call front-end coding, which is actually what you're seeing right in front of you right now. You are actually looking at a web page, and you're looking at the front end of a website. HTML is a language. It stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And the hypertext is that you have these text links that you can jump from one page to another. It's hypertext. The markup language, though, tells you more about what this language is like. You mark up or tag or label content. If you think about going to someone's tag sale and you want to buy something, you don't know what the cost of that item is unless they've tagged it with a price. So the same thing when it comes to content. If you think about a piece of text, is that a heading? Is it a paragraph? Is it an item in a list? You don't know what it is without some sort of label. And so HTML labels or marks up all of your content so that you have some structure to that content and you know what things are. Now, CSS, Cascading Style Sheets, styles your content based on the HTML markup. So you can go in and say, oh, these headings should look one way, paragraphs should look a different way, there should be this amount of space, it should be in this position on the page. And you can style all of the visual elements of laying out the web page and making it look the way you want. So these are two companion languages that work together. One is to create the content, which is your HTML, and the other one is to style that content, and that's CSS. Now, JavaScript comes in on top of these two things, and it works with both of them, and it adds interactivity, animation, and logic. So if you want to type something into a form field, for example, and you want to verify, oh, is that a valid email address? Is that a valid phone number? JavaScript can check for those types of things. It can also do something that when you click on something, an animation plays. And so any sort of interactivity, animation, and any functionality in terms of logic, that's what JavaScript can do. So it interacts with the HTML and the CSS to make the page more dynamic and interactive, and you can animate things. That's actually one of the ways that I can hit my right arrow key on this web page and it goes to the next slide. That's because JavaScript was detecting a keystroke and did something based on that keystroke. Now, once you've learned these languages, the cool thing is that even though we're applying this to web pages today, you can use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for more than just websites. When it comes to HTML and CSS in particular, they are used not only in websites, but also in emails. So if you've ever gotten a nice looking email in your inbox, and I'm sure you have, that is laid out with HTML and CSS. eBooks are also made with HTML and CSS, and even some apps. If you've ever heard of web apps, those are also built with HTML, CSS, and often some JavaScript as well. So the point that I want to make here is just to say that it's worthwhile to learn HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. They're great for websites, of course, but you can use them for even more. And the more people use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, the more they want to use it. And it's just, these are great cross-platform languages that you can use for lots of different things. So they are worthwhile in learning. Also, I believe that if anybody wants to learn these things and they put their mind to it, that it is attainable for people. It's not just for the biggest computer geeks that are out there, and I say that lovingly because I consider myself a computer geek. So no offense intended there. To me, I love computers, I love technology, and but when it comes to sharing that with other people, I like to see that people can learn this stuff and that they can do it themselves. And you are learning a language though, so don't think that it's going to be intuitive. Some people ask me when they're learning, they're like, well, how would I know that? You never intuit language. You never just figure it out. You have to study it. Someone has to teach you, or you have to read about it. And so with study, with you applying yourself, it is definitely a learnable skill. But nobody says, oh, you know what? I'm going to go have a conversation with somebody in Spanish, and I'm just going to wing it. I'll be able to figure it out myself. Nobody really says that. They say, I want to learn Spanish, so I'm going to study Spanish, and I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to then be able to speak and write Spanish. Now, with a language like that, it can be very time-consuming to learn, and there is a lot to learn with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and it can definitely be a time investment. But for me, I was never good with foreign languages. For some reason, I'm much better with computer languages. So personally, I think that learning HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is definitely easier than a foreign language. So if you weren't good at foreign languages, don't worry. You can still be fine with computer languages. The main thing to think about when you're getting into HTML and CSS is that this is not super high-level programming. There's easier coding, and then there's harder coding. When you're creating a web page, when you're marking up things, that is a much easier concept than writing an application. So if you're going to create an app for iOS or Android or Mac or Windows, that is what I consider full-blown programming. That is a much higher level, harder to understand, kind of harder to learn concept. Coding like HTML and CSS, definitely much easier. So if you've ever tried more complex programming and been scared off, maybe take a look at HTML and CSS, and it'll be a little bit easier to learn. Whenever you're getting started with any sort of coding language, the biggest thing is just to focus on the concepts. There's going to be a lot of verbiage and wording and syntax that you have to get used to, and that's just going to come with practice. The more you do this, the more you write HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, the more you're going to remember it. You're going to burn it into your brain by just repetition. The more you practice, the better you'll get at remembering the things. Also, you don't have to remember every single thing off the top of your head. There's always Google for the things that you forget. There's certain things that I rarely do, and I don't have to remember those off the top of my head. I have to know how to do them in the sense that, like, okay, I know I can do this. I know I have to generally do these things, but I can always Google for the exact code that I need and say, oh, okay, that's the exact terminology. That was the exact syntax that I need. The things that I do all the time, of course, I remember those just by typing out the code myself because I do them regularly. So it's just like I'm speaking right now and I'm not really thinking about what I'm saying. I could just speak. And it's just intuitive for me. I can just do it without thinking. The same thing eventually will come with coding. Right now, I can just open up and start to code, and I can do it without having to reference things for all the fundamental things that I do. And you can get to that point as well. It just takes some time to memorize the things. And so practice. The more regularly you can practice, the more you can practice, the sooner you're going to become a good coder. And so until you have that memorization, mainly focus on the general syntax of how to write things and the big picture of how things work, and then just get started building things. Start simple and then grow more complex over time. Sometimes people choose too big of a complex project in the beginning, and then they get frustrated. Keep it simple. Start out easy and just do a simple thing. That's why we're going to keep this exercise, this website that we're building today, simple. We're not going to get into all the different various issues. We're going to keep it easy just to get you started, and then you can grow from there, right? Just like when you were a baby, you learn to crawl and then walk and then run. Same thing with coding. Start off easy. So when we're thinking about terminology, and these things will come up if you're ever looking at job posts or blog posts, reading about this stuff, when you are looking at a website, which actually, again, right now you are looking at a website, you are looking at the web browser. And this is, again, what we call the front end of a website. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, as I explained before. HTML is your content, CSS is your styling for that content, and JavaScript is adding interactivity and animation and logic. Now the back end, what is happening behind the scenes, that is your web server. So to run a website like nobledesktop.com, you need a web server. And at its fundamental core, a web server is a computer with a folder for all your stuff, and it's running some special web server software. And that allows it to take requests that when somebody wants a website, you get an incoming request. It says, oh, I want this file. Okay, I'll send you that file back, and then you can view it in your web browser. Web browsers are HTML rendering programs. They will render the code so that you can see the result of that code. But a server has to be able to send that code out to you. Now, some of that code, like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, is rendered in the browser itself. Other types of code are rendered and kind of run on the server. So backend languages, when it comes to languages, PHP, Ruby, JavaScript, these are backend languages. And then there's backend software like WordPress. So WordPress is written in the language PHP. If you've ever heard of any of these things, you might have heard of WordPress. In fact, you might have a WordPress website or blog, or you might know someone who does. WordPress runs something about a third of all websites, so it runs a lot of the web. For any one technology to have that much market share in the scheme of the entire web is pretty big. So WordPress is the most popular content management system, or CMS for short. A content management system, when you think about content, you think about text and images. It's going to help you manage that content. So when you're creating a website, if you just used basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, anybody that wanted to edit that website would have to know those coding languages to be able to go in and make changes. But if you want to share a website with a client and they want to be able to go in and edit the content without having to worry about the coding side of things, you can take your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and you can create what's called a WordPress theme. And those themes are made of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Anybody can write those themes. Anybody can write the code and make anything theme that they want. Or you can get a theme that somebody else made and change it and tweak it. But those themes control the look and feel of the website. So WordPress allows clients to manage the content while that content is separated from the look and feel, because that look and feel of the website is managed through code. So as long as you know how to edit HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and you know how a WordPress theme is put together, you can go in and create your own themes or update themes and allow your clients to easily edit their content. And so even if you knew HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, WordPress offers a lot of features in managing your content, so it can still be a very useful thing. Even if you know just the plain code, content management systems offer a lot of features. So WordPress is written in PHP, but there are other coding languages like Ruby and Ruby on Rails. There's also JavaScript, you'll notice, is also on the server. Now, JavaScript used to be only for front end. It used to only render in the browser. Once people learned JavaScript, they said, hey, I'd really like to run this on the server too, because I already know JavaScript. I don't want to have to learn another language like PHP or Ruby on Rails. So can I run this on the server? And so now we can actually run JavaScript on the server with something called Node.js. So that allows us to do the same types of things we do in PHP and Ruby on Rails, but using the JavaScript coding language. So each one of them has some benefits and downsides to them. So all of them do very similar things. We're not going to get into the back end today, but just I wanted to kind of give you an overview of the general idea of what these things do before we get started. We're going to focus on just the HTML and CSS today and just getting you started. We're just going to scratch the surface of what you can do, but we want to get you started with your very first web page. Now, the first thing, though, before you actually start to code is you do need to have a design, and you're probably going to have some graphics for the website. So that's what we're going to start with, talk about that real quick, and then we'll dive into the actual coding of the website. So when it comes to designing, professional designers often use Photoshop or Sketch. Now, Adobe Photoshop is for Mac and PC. Sketch is a Mac-only app, and these are two popular design apps that web designers and app designers, whether they're UX designers or UI designers, like to use these apps to design the look and feel and the working of the site. And the idea is that before you put up a building, for example, you wouldn't just start slapping up walls and say, I'll figure out where everything's going to go as I'm actually building the walls. No, you would actually design a floor plan. So you'd come up with where all the wall supports are going to be, where all the rooms are going to be, how many floors there's going to be, what the roof is going to be like, and you would plan the thing out. Same thing goes for a website. You would plan out the user experience, or UX. That's what we call UX design, user experience design. You'd plan out how it works. You might understand issues that your users are facing. You might have to research them, talk to people, and maybe do some basic designs and test it with users and see if your basic ideas are working, and then eventually make those things look nice, which is what we call the visual design, or UI, user interface design. That's the making it look nice kind of part of it. And so Photoshop and Sketch are very popular for doing that. Now, Adobe XD is basically Adobe's version of Sketch. And it is the newer of these programs, but it has been gaining momentum. Even though it's new, it's been catching up in terms of capabilities. In some ways, it's not as good as Sketch, and in some ways, it's better than Sketch. It's kind of a mixed bag at this point. Kind of depends on what you're doing. But I would say any of these are good choices that you can make. In terms of what I'm seeing the industry using, right now it's a lot of Photoshop and Sketch, but I think that Adobe XD is going to become a bigger contender as time goes on. I'm seeing more and more people choosing Adobe XD. Adobe XD does work on Mac and PC, so if I was on PC, Photoshop and XD are really the only choice you have. If you're on a Mac, you can choose any three of these. Because Photoshop is so popular, it runs on Mac and PC. I'm going to be doing a quick little demo with Photoshop to show you that side of it. But it doesn't really matter which one of these you are using when it comes to just saving out a graphic. I'll just cover a couple basic things here. So let's talk about doing the basic design and exporting some graphics, and then we'll code up the web page and make an actual working website. So here I am in Photoshop, and if you're going to create a brand new file here in Photoshop, I'm going to go to File, New, and they do have a web section. I happen to be in Photoshop 2020 for this version, so if using a different version, this might look a little bit different, but the fundamental concepts are going to be the same. There are some various presets here, and I want to keep things simple today. I don't want to get too complex, so I'm not going to go into the difference between low-res screens and high-res screens and all that stuff. I'm just going to keep it very simple, and we're just going to talk about the normal, typical, regular, or low-res screen. I'm not going to get into retina screens or high-res screens and how to deal with those. That's definitely something you'd want to learn, but I'm just going to keep it very simple. There's this web most common preset here, and you'll notice its dimensions here, which are listed here as well as over here on the right. 1366 pixels. We measure screens in pixels, and basically a pixel is just a square block on your screen. And so when you measure across all those little square blocks, different screens have different resolutions, a different number of pixels. So some screens are 1440 pixels, some are 1366, and some are 1280. I would say somewhere between 1280 and 1440 is about your average size for the majority of computers. Of course, some people have smaller, some people have bigger. When they say the web most common, notice that that's right in the middle between the 1280 and the 1440. Because we're designing responsive websites, and by responsive website I mean a website that responds or adapts to different size screens, meaning it will look good on a mobile phone, a tablet, and a desktop. It's not so important which one we're designing for. We want to make sure that it's going to look good on any of these screens. So we do have to make a choice because we have to put in some sort of size here. So a lot of times I like to go with the 1440, but anywhere from 1280 to 1440, somewhere in that range is perfectly fine. When you're getting used to pixels and thinking about measurements, just a way to think about this. Let's say I go for the 1280, by the way. We'll keep it easy. And I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to say 1200, just to round out and just kind of keep easy math. Let's just say 1200 pixels here. I'm going to create this file here and just zoom in just a little bit here. Okay. No, I want to do fit on screen. I want to see the whole thing. Okay, so this is the whole width of the web page that I'm designing. If this is 1200, I went with 1200 because it's easy math. When it comes to sizing, if you're new to the web, you're trying to get used to how big is stuff. So what I found is an easy way to get used to pixel sizing is to think in relationship to the whole screen. If the whole screen is 1200 pixels, and I say 1200 pixels, it's the full width of the screen. Now, if I think about half of the screen, right? So I want to make something approximately half the screen. That 1200 divided by 2 is 600 pixels. So if something is 600 pixels, it's about half your screen size. If I say make something 100 pixels, think in relationship to the whole screen. 100 pixels versus 1200 pixels. That's about a 1/12 of the screen. So 100 pixels would be pretty small in terms of the entire screen size. If I say 1000 pixels, that's almost the entire width of the screen because it's 1200 pixels. So hopefully thinking of the relationship of whatever you're designing to the whole screen, hopefully that'll kind of give you an idea of how big something is. So 20 pixels is very small, 1000 pixels is much bigger, and hopefully that gets you used to it a little bit more. Again, practice makes perfect. As you develop, as you keep working with this, it's just going to get easier and easier to work with these things. All right, so once you have this up, you're going to use your type tool to create text. You'll click and type out some text. This is a heading. I wasn't actually typing there. This is a heading. And we can go in there and make it bigger. I'm going to go into my Photoshop preferences, by the way. This would be under Edit Preferences if you're on Windows. I'm going to go to Photoshop Preferences, and we're going to go to Units and Rulers. Because we're doing web design, we're going to make sure the rulers are in pixels and the type is in pixels as well. Okay, so if I go back here to my type tool and grab this, so this type is 44 pixels. That's the size of this type. When it comes to choosing fonts, an important thing to consider is whether that font is licensed for web use. Just because you have it on your computer doesn't mean that you are legally allowed to use it in your website. So definitely check with whoever the manufacturer is for that particular font and make sure that it is legally licensed for web use. We're not going to get into loading custom web fonts here in this seminar, but you can definitely load in custom web fonts as long as you have the license to it. As far as places to get web fonts, you can get them through Google Web Fonts. You can also get them through Adobe fonts, and so there definitely are places you can get them. Here we've got fonts.google.com. This is one place you can get them, and also Adobe Fonts, which used to be called Typekit. And Adobe Fonts, if you are a Creative Cloud member, you get access to Adobe Fonts, and all of these can also be used on websites as well. We're not going to get into the custom font side of things. For today, we're just going to keep with a font that everybody has on their machine, something like Arial, just to get us started and take one less complexity off the table here. Again, start simple and build up as you go through. Eventually, you want to learn how to do custom fonts, but you don't have to do it right away. Doesn't have to be the first thing. All right, so you would have to learn whatever graphics tool you're using, whether it's Sketch or Photoshop or Adobe XD. You have to learn how to use this tool to position things, bring in graphics, style things, and make it look the way that you want it to look. I'm not going to spend the time building a whole document. I've already started a design here. And so here I've got some page designs here for the home page. This is a Photoshop document that I've already done. Just going to zoom in here. I specifically kept this as a narrow design just so that I could show you all the content here plus all the panels here on the right hand side, just to keep this, again, very simple for this demonstration. So I brought in a logo, put some text here, have a photo, and some additional text. Very simple thing that we're going to be able to design, code, and build today. All right, so I've got this layout. Now, if I go in with my type tool, we'll notice that this is text, just using the basic Arial font. Everybody should have Arial on their machine. Same thing down here. Again, just using Arial. Everybody should have that on their machine, so we don't have to worry about custom fonts. But there are some graphics in here that I brought in. And now that I've designed this page, I have a logo here. I have this image here. We do want to think about how to actually start transitioning this over to a web page. Right now, I have a design that looks like a web page, but is not an actual live working web page. The live working web page would need to be coded, and we're going to need to transition this. So once you design something, you then need to code it. And the coding part is going to be able to handle styling type, sizing elements here, like setting the width of this, but we're going to need the graphics. So I'm going to need to get the logo out of here, and I'm also going to need to get the photograph out of here. So let's start by exporting this photograph right here. In each app, it's going to be a little different as far as how you export things. In Photoshop, there are layers for each thing that you have created. So here's a home layer, which is for this image right here. I'm going to right click or control click on that, and I'm going to export that as, which gives me my web export. I'm going to make this window a little bit bigger here so we can get a bigger preview and zoom in on this. I'm going to zoom in just so you can see this really well here. Now, depending on the video compression and how this is coming through to you, not exactly sure how great the quality is going to be on this as far as judging the exact quality, but I'm going to walk you through the concepts of how to optimize this graphic here. Photographs are best optimized as JPEG. There are some other formats that you can use. So PNG, JPEG, GIF, and SVG are the main formats that you can use on websites. For anything photographic though, JPEG is going to give the best quality and the smallest file size. The goal on web graphics is you want them to look good, but you need them to be as small as possible. Google ranks websites on many factors, but speed is one of those factors. So the faster your website loads, users are happy, also Google's happy, and it's going to rank you in part based on your speed of your website. So you want to make sure that your images are optimized as best as possible. You want to make sure they're the right size, which we've already done by putting them into our design and making them the right size. And now we need to reduce the quality as much as we can get away with. So I call this the limbo bar of web design. How low can you go? So at 100% quality, it looks good, but it's 192K. As I go all the way down to the other end, down to 1% quality, it looks bad, but it's only 12K. So between 12K and 192K, that's a pretty huge range in different quality, in different size and quality. So your goal is how low can you get away with this? As you're going lower on this, your file size is shrinking, but your image quality is reducing. So as you're reducing this quality, you're going to see this look worse and worse and worse. So at some point, it's going to look too bad. You're going to start to notice that those details are lost that you want to keep. It's very important to be at the right size when judging this. If this is a normal resolution or what we call low-res graphic, sometimes also called a 1x graphic, depends on your screen as to what zoom level you're going to be at. This is where some of the other programs are a little bit easier to work with. In Photoshop, you have to know the resolution of your file and the resolution of your screen. I happen to be working on a Retina screen, so if this is a low-res file, but I'm on a Retina or high-res screen, then I have to be at 200% for this to be the size that it's going to be on my website. If you're on a low-res file with a low-res screen, a non-Retina screen, then you'd be at 100% quality. 100% size, not quality. So I'm going to zoom to 200%, and this is the size it's going to be in the web page, and I'm going to judge the quality at this size. So I look at it at the high end and see how good it looks, and I work my way down. And the goal is to get this as low as you can get away with. Now, if you start to notice big, chunky, pixelized artifacts appearing, then you've gone too far. If you notice details that you want to keep blurring away, you've gone too far. But a lot of times you can be somewhere between like 60 and 70% quality, and it still looks pretty good. And look at the difference. At 100% quality, it's 192K. When I get down to 60% quality, it jumps down to 53K. That was 192K, and now it's 53. So that is like a quarter almost of the size. Even though we only dropped 40% quality, it dropped 75% of the file size almost. Not quite, but it's just an exponential growth. When you get above like 80, 90% quality in JPEG, the file size is just balloon way up. You notice hardly any difference at all in the image quality. It doesn't look that much better, but the file size just gets huge. So somewhere around like 60s and 70%, somewhere around there is kind of the sweet spot. If you go too low, things start to get blurry and fuzzy and it doesn't look so good. So generally somewhere around 60 to 70% quality is generally going to be best. Again, I'm not sure exactly how well this will come through in the video, but when you're judging this on your own screen, you'll be able to see it better. But don't go zooming in really close, doing pixel peeping, looking for those little artifacts that can sometimes come out, because as long as you're viewing this at the size that everybody else will be viewing it on your websites, as long as it looks good there at that size, you're going to be fine. So I think somewhere around that 62%, it looks good in this case. So I'm going to go ahead and export it. So I'll click export, and I'm just going to go to my desktop and throw it on my desktop. Now, when it comes to the logo, I'm going to right click on that and again, choose export as. So that logo is this logo right here. Let's do an export as for that. Now, even though there is an option here to do SVG, so SVG stands for Scalable Vector Graphics. I brought this into Photoshop as a vector graphic. I brought it in as an Adobe Illustrator file, and Adobe Illustrator is a vector graphics program. Photoshop should be able to export a vector graphic properly. I say should. It doesn't. It actually messes it up. It'll look like it's a vector file, but it's actually a vector file with an embedded pixel-based version of it. Since it doesn't do such a great job, we'd really need to go over to Illustrator to save that out. But it gets a bit more complex. There's different saving options, and then when we put it in, there might be additional options that we might have to do some stuff with. I didn't want to get into SVG here today. I did want to say that SVG is a great format, and we should be using vector graphics whenever it comes to vector graphics. But just to keep things just ultra simple today, I'm going to use a pixel-based graphic instead. Again, ideal, it would always definitely be an SVG. It just gets into some issues that I didn't want to cover today. So we're going to keep it simple. We're going to keep it as either a PNG or a GIF. Why? Because first of all, JPEG doesn't support transparency. Not that I actually need transparency here in this page because it's going to be on a white background, so I don't need transparency. But the biggest reason is JPEG is good for photographs. it's not good for flat, solid graphics like this. So this is 9K as a JPEG. If I switch over to PNG, it drops to half the size, 4.8K. That's a huge difference. And if I want to have transparency, I can have transparency as well. That's great. Now, GIF is an older format, and sometimes it can be smaller than PNG. It kind of depends on the image. In this case, it's 2.8K. Wow. Versus PNG, which is 4.8. That's pretty cool. Now, the reason that GIF is smaller right now is because GIF is limited to 256 colors. It's what's considered an 8-bit format. If I switch back to PNG, right now we're using PNG 24-bit version, which is millions of colors. I don't have millions of colors here. I have a lot less. So I could use the smaller file size here, which is also 8-bit, like GIF is 8-bit. And that's going to limit it to 256 colors. That definitely helps. I get down to 3.5K, but that's still bigger than the GIF at 2.8K. So I was actually surprised when I did this because normally PNG, because it's a newer format, it normally compresses better than GIF in most cases. And so sometimes people just always save as PNG and they don't even bother trying GIF anymore. But every once in a while, GIF ends up being the smaller file size, like it is in this case. So quality-wise, it's the same. A PNG with the smaller file size here, this 8-bit version, versus a GIF looks exactly the same. When it comes to transparency, there is a little bit of a difference. The PNG will have a better transparency than the GIF. The GIF can sometimes have chunky white edges that the PNG won't. But in this case, I'm not using that transparency anyway. I'm going to put this on a white background, so whether it had transparency or not, I don't care. So I'm going to go with GIF because it's smaller. I'm going to save that out and simply call that logo. All right. So now I have a plan for the layout of my web page. I have the graphics. I also have all the text. So I know exactly how I want to code up this web page, but I actually have to go ahead and code up the web page. So that's the next step. You design it, you create your graphics, and then you code. So let's pop back into my presentation. Next up, we're going to do some coding. So that means you need a program to write your code in. That's called a code editor. There are text editors like TextEdit on the Mac or Notepad on Windows. Text editors like Microsoft Word, they are great for editing text, but they don't understand code. Code editors, when it comes to code, code is text, but it's specialized text. So Sublime Text, Atom, and Visual Studio Code, think of these code editors as specialized text editors. You just write text like you would normally write text, but you're writing codes in there, and these programs are going to help you to write those codes. They're going to give you tons of shortcuts to make coding easier, and they'll save the files in the proper way. A code file is essentially a plain text file with a different file extension. So technically anything that can write a plain .txt file could be a code editor, but that doesn't mean that they understand code. Sublime Text is my personal favorite. It's what I'm going to be demonstrating today. If you want to get Sublime Text, it's a free unlimited trial. You can try it for as long as you want. But even though it works fully functional, every once in a while when you go to save the file, it will say, do you want to buy? And you can keep clicking cancel for as long as you want to try it out. But at some point, you're going to say, yeah, I like this program, and if you want to buy it, it's $80 to buy it. And then the asking for purchasing it, that message goes away. But the trial version is fully functional, works exactly like the paid version, just you get nagged to buy it every once in a while. So if you like it, go ahead and buy it. It's an $80 one-time fee. Later at some point, if they come out with a new version, they'll have an upgrade, but there's no subscription, just a one-time $80 fee. Works on Mac and PC and is great. Coding editors are personal preferences. Some people like Sublime Text, some people like Atom, some people like Visual Studio Code. Which one you like? I would say try them all and see which one you like best. My personal preference is Sublime Text. I've tried them all. Atom is made by GitHub. Visual Studio Code is made by Microsoft. And if you're a Mac user, don't hold that against them. It's still a great Mac app. And so actually, GitHub was bought by Microsoft. So actually, Microsoft actually has two of the code editors here. So it's Microsoft's Visual Studio Code and GitHub's Atom, but GitHub's owned by Microsoft. Both of these are completely free, and they are good code editors as well. All of these are good code editors. You cannot go wrong with any of them. But they do all work a little differently. They look a little differently. When it comes to the code you write the same code in any of them. But it's all about the features that they offer and the keyboard shortcuts and how they work. I keep coming back to Sublime Text after trying the rest. But I would say download Sublime Text, try it out. But at some point, give the others a shot too and see how you like those. See which one you like best. So I've got Sublime Text, and that's what I'm going to use. I'm going to go ahead and start coding here. So let's take a look. How do we actually make this a working web page? So here I am in Sublime Text. And when you first launch a code editor, you're greeted with a window where you write code. In Sublime Text, there's really no other interface because what else are you going to do? You're just going to start writing your code. And so that I can write this code in a specific language, I'm going to go ahead and save this and give it a file extension so that Sublime Text knows what kind of code this is. I'm going to save it to my desktop. And what tells Sublime Text that this is an HTML page is that this ends in .html. So functionally speaking, when you have a file, and I'm just going to call this demo.html, this is your file name, and this is your file extension. The file extension, functionally speaking, this is a plain text file. It's like a .txt file. But we don't want to write plain text. We want to write HTML. So we change that txt to HTML. But anything that can open up a plain text file could, in theory, open up this HTML document. Just definitely don't use Microsoft Word to do code editing. Microsoft Word is going to offer tons of help that you do not want. So use a code editor, don't use a text editor to do this. So demo.html, now that I have that, let's go ahead and click save. And now I can start to write some HTML. HTML is in tags. Now tags are in these less than, greater than brackets. We're going to start with the HTML tag. Once again, a tag labels something. It marks up or describes what something is. The idea is you're going to wrap a tag around something to say what that thing is. So we need to wrap it around. We need to have a start and an end for most tags. The start and the end tag basically are the same, except the end tag has a slash. Notice that as soon as I type that slash, how Sublime Text underlines both of them to show a connection between them. When I click into one, it underlines the other to say, hey, those are a pair. They go together. This starts our HTML document. This ends our HTML document. Everything inside is therefore marked up or labeled to be HTML. It's kind of saying, hey, this is HTML, just so you know. Now, within an HTML document, we have a head and a body, kind of like a person. Let me just ask you, which do you think goes on top, the head or the body? If you answered head, you're correct. Nobody's ever gotten that one wrong. So the head goes on top. We have the start of the head tag, and the end tag is exactly the same as the start, just with a slash. Now watch as I type in the start of the tag, and then I type slash. It automatically ends that tag because I'm in a code editor that understands HTML. It understands when I type a slash, I want to end a tag, and I had one tag that I'd started, but I hadn't ended it. So it offers to end that for me. How nice. Now, we have the head and we have the body. So here I'm going to have the body, and then down below that, I'm going to end the body. So I'm going to start the tag and hit slash, and now I have the end of the body. So anything I put inside of here is going to be the head. Anything I put inside of here is going to be the body. So inside that body, I'm going to say this is a web page. And no lie, I just made a web page. A very, very simple web page, but I made a web page. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And now I want to preview this in a web browser. So I can open up Safari, Google Chrome, Firefox. If I'm on Windows, if I'm on an old version of Windows, I can open up Microsoft Internet Explorer, which is now a defunct old browser, and it's been replaced with Microsoft Edge if I'm on a new version of Windows and you have Microsoft Edge. But all of these are web browsers. Now, what is a web browser? It's an HTML rendering program. It's going to render your HTML, your CSS, and JavaScript, and the codes that we're typing in are going to be rendered or enacted by the browser. So here I am in Chrome. I'm going to open up a new window here for us to work in. And if you're used to opening a file in Microsoft Word or some program, Photoshop, whatever it is, you would just go to File, Open to do that. You could do the same thing in Chrome. File, Open. If I'm on a Mac, I have a menu here. If you're on Windows, you don't have a menu there. You do have a menu over here. I don't know if the file option is in there, but you can always hit on the Mac Command O, or on Windows Control O to get to File, Open. And just navigate your computer like you would for any file and open it. And boom, here we go. This is a web page. We just made a web page. Now, most importantly here, don't just pay attention to what you see, pay attention to what you don't see. You don't see any of these codes that we typed in, right? Because these codes are rendered by the browser. The browser knows to take anything in the body and put that here into the main portion of the web page. That's the body of the web page. We don't see the body tag. Nobody wants to see the body tag. We want to see the effect of what these codes are telling the browser to do. We don't want to see the code. We want to see the result of the code. So another way to open up a web page in the browser, I'm going to close that window and just open up a new one, is to simply drag and drop. So if you're on your desktop and you have an HTML document, you could just drag and drop it onto your browser and it opens up. You can also right click or control click on a Mac and choose Open With and choose your browser. Same thing works on Windows as well. Okay, but drag and drop, definitely the easiest way to open that up. All right. Now let's go over one. Actually, let's close this and let's start to work with some real content. Okay, I'm going to close that. In the exercise, there is some class files that you can download. I've already gone ahead and downloaded these. The link for that is in the PDF exercise. We have a link that you can go to our website, punch in a download code, and download those exercise files. Here we have those exercise files. And in here we have a website. And we're going to make a little fictional website here for me, the one that I was designing in Photoshop. We're going to code that up. I'm going to come in here, and we've already exported those images in here just in case you don't have Photoshop. We're not going to make you use Photoshop to actually export those graphics. But we did export the GIF here. See what I meant about the chunky white stuff of a GIF? I'm not going to care about that because once that's on a white background, nobody's going to notice that. The home JPEG that we created, that's in here as well. Also, I threw in another image in here, a contact JPEG. We're going to use that on a contact page because we're going to make two pages. We're going to make a home page and a contact page. The logo is going to be on both of them, but each page will have their own distinct image. Notice the images are the same size because they're going to go in the same place. To save you a little bit of work, we went ahead and created your first web page for you. Now, a couple things about this page. Notice the name of it is called index.html. So you can name your web pages anything you want, but there are some rules to keep in mind. So first of all, life is easier in lowercase. Instead of using capital letters, like let's say a contact us page like that, when you link to this page, depending on how your server is set up, it might be case sensitive. So you might have to link to this with the correct upper and lowercase combination of letters. It's much easier if you just keep everything lowercase. So you're technically allowed to do upper and lowercase, but just keep it all lowercase. It's just much easier. You are not allowed to use spaces in your file names on the web. So spaces are not allowed. You can use a dash or an underscore, but don't use a space. Most people use a dash because it's easier to type. It only requires hitting one key, but you can use an underscore. It does require holding shift to do that, so it's a little bit harder to type. So most people end up just using a dash in their file name. Okay, so with those things in mind, that should take care of most of the rules for naming. Now, you can name it whatever you want except for your homepage. Your homepage has a special name, and that is index.html. That is going to be your first page of your website. So if you go to nobledesktop.com or danrodney.com, the first page that loads is index.html. You're going to potentially have lots of pages in your website. How out of all of those would the website know which is the first? It's that special name index.html. Web servers have special software on them. The web server knows to look for index.html if you don't give it a file name. So when you just go to nobledesktop.com, since you didn't give it a specific web page to view, it's going to find index.html, special reserved name. From there, you can link to any other page name that you want, given that you're following those rules that I mentioned, but your first page has to be called index. So if you're making a very small one-page website, you will only have one HTML file. It will be called index.html. If you're wondering why it's called index, one kind of way that you can rationalize this is if you think about a book, an index is how you find things in a book. Granted, it's in the back, but it is a way to find things in a book. It's your index of content. So in a homepage, when you go to the homepage, you can find things in the website. Kind of conceptually makes sense, right? Even if it doesn't make sense. Web servers require that we call it index.html, so we have to call it that because the web server requires that. So sometimes you just do things because you're required to do it. All right, so I have this website. I'm going to open that up in Sublime Text. So I could drag it onto Sublime Text. I'm going to right click and I'm going to say open in Sublime Text like so. All right, I'm going to make this bigger here. All right, so just to save some time, we copied and pasted all of the text from our Photoshop file here into this page. Now notice there's no code actually in here. There's just text. So I'm going to open this up in my web browser. So this is the same index.html that I was just looking at in Sublime Text. I'm going to open this up in Google Chrome. Interesting. Look at the difference here if I put these side by side. Notice that there are some line breaks here, but those are not coming through into the web browser. That's because I never told the browser to actually hit return. Hitting return in your code does not hit return in the browser itself. You need codes to do that. So we need to start adding all the various codes that we're going to need and making this web page look the way we want it to look. So as we learned before, we wrap everything in an HTML tag, and that says all of this stuff is HTML. So we start that at the beginning of the file, and we put that at the end of the file. I'm just going to type a slash, and it's going to end that for me. So all this stuff is going to be HTML. We have the two main parts, the head and the body. So I'm going to start the head up here. I'm then going to end the head. And then all of this content is the body of the document. It's the stuff that we see. So I'm going to start the body tag here, and then I'm going to go after all of this stuff. And so the body tag wraps all of the content, all of the body of content in your web page. We just made this the basic tags, kind of basic web page, but there's a lot more stuff we're going to need to do. So we're going to need to say what things are paragraphs, what things are headings, and so forth. So let's go through and learn some additional tags. So we have, for example, the P for paragraph tag. This is a paragraph of text, and I'm going to wrap a paragraph tag around that text. So we start the paragraph tag and we end the paragraph tag. You should be able to select something and the tag should wrap around that. It should start and end right around that content. So I'm going to go ahead and just move this over here so we can see them at the same time. I'm going to save that. Come back to the browser. Now, if you don't do anything in the browser doesn't know that you've done anything. So I have to hit the reload or refresh button, and that's going to go get the latest version of the page with its updated code. All right, so now we see that that looks like a separated paragraph, and we could do additional paragraphs here. So I can start this paragraph here. Zoom out a little bit so you can see a little bit more of this at a time without me having to scroll. Here is another paragraph here. So it's important to save in your code editor and then come back to your browser and hit reload. And you're separating out all those different paragraphs. Now, if P is for paragraph, what do you think is for heading? If you guessed H, you'd be almost right. If there was only one level of heading, it would simply be H. But there are different levels of headings. There are main topics, and there are subtopics and sub-subtopics. So H1 is a first level heading. It is your main topic. So actually, I just realized here, this is my main topic. So this page, the home page, is about hi, I'm Dan Rodney. So H1 would be an appropriate tag for this text right here. Now, let's save that, come back and hit refresh. Notice that the heading is big, it's bold, like a paragraph, it's on its own line. We didn't mark this up as a heading to make it big and bold. You can make it any size, and if you don't want it to be bold, you can make it regular. The reason we mark this up as a heading is because conceptually to search engines, for example, we want them to know the structure of our page. We want them to know the topic of the page. And so actually, maybe even this heading here, like, hi, I'm Dan Rodney, maybe not even the best kind of heading. I could say, hi, I'm Dan Rodney. I'm going to copy this correct apostrophe right here. I'm a web designer and trainer. Right? So if somebody comes, oh, I didn't type that in right. Hit the M instead of the, I hit the apostrophe instead, I hit the comma instead of the M key there. Right? Hi, I'm Dan Rodney. I'm a web designer and trainer. All right, so if somebody just sees that, they know exactly what this page is about, and web designer and trainer are in the heading of the web page. So that's going to be good for things like Google, knowing that this is a main topic, like web designer and trainer, right? Or instructor, whatever you want to say. So there are subtopics to this, right? I'm a trainer. I'm also a web developer, designer, and more. Actually, maybe here, like I could say, I teach people to make websites. That kind of describes what this is about. So this is the main topic, and this is subtopics. So this would be a subheading, an H2. It is a broken down topic that is part of the main topic. So let's save that and hit refresh. So if this page is about Dan Rodney, I'm a trainer is one of the things that I do. Down below here, I'm also a web developer. This is another thing that I do. So this would be another subheading. Let's save that and hit refresh. So if you think about these are subtopics of equal weight, right? They're two different things that I do. I'm a trainer. I'm also a web developer. So they're on equal par. But the main topic is I'm Dan Rodney. I teach people to make websites. Right. And actually, maybe I could just say, hello. Hello. I teach people to make websites. So if the main page is about me and kind of what I do, I then want to break it up into the different things that I do, that I'm a trainer, that I'm a web developer. So every page that you do is always going to have some main topic. Whether you break it down into subtopics or not, that depends on your content. But you're definitely always going to have a heading 1. Some pages will have heading 2s. Now, if under I'm a trainer, if I'm going to break that down into further subtopics, like maybe the different things that I teach, then those would be heading 3s. If I would then further break down those topics into further subtopics, those would be heading 4s. You can go all the way from H1 down to H6. So you can really go to subtopics if you really need to. But every page at least should have a good heading 1. This is going to be important for Google. You want to make sure that you get in there some keywords that Google's going to, that you want to rank on Google for. So as an example here, let me go to my personal website here, danrodney.com. And I have this page here about Mac keyboard shortcuts. So this is the heading 1 in my page. So Mac keyboard shortcuts. If people are searching for Mac keyboard shortcuts, first of all, I want them to see Mac keyboard shortcuts on the page. So of course I'm going to put it there on the page. But I also want that when people search for that on Google, that I want to come up for that as well. And so you always are going to have the heading 1 here on the page for people to see. But there's also another thing up here at the top of the page where it says this again in a slightly different way. Mac keyboard shortcuts and keystrokes, Dan Rodney. So that's another title, but it's not here in the body of the web page. It's kind of up here at the top or the head of the web page. So where does that come in? So you might have been wondering what goes on in the head. Well, the head is kind of the brain of the web page. It's where the web page thinks about things. Most of what goes on in the head is invisible, behind the scenes stuff that you don't see going on. The title of the web page, though, that's an exception. That's one of the few things you actually see here. So in the head section, you will always have a title. You will start the title tag and you will end the title tag. You'll put your title inside of there. So this is a good title for this might be, Dan Rodney, web developer, designer, and instructor. Right. So if somebody is looking for a web developer or a web designer or an instructor, these are also keywords that would be useful for Google to know about. When they come to the page, they'll see, oh, this person teaches people to make websites. Okay, that's what I'm looking for. So let's go ahead and save this. Come back to my browser here and hit refresh. And so now up here, we see this title here at the top of the page. So that title is going to be good for search engines. You always want to have a good title, but then you also want to have a good heading on the page. So both are important things to include. Now that title is not only useful for Google, but it's also going to be good for bookmarking. So if somebody comes in and they bookmark the page, they're going to see the title of your web page. That's going to be what they bookmark. Just to tie this into Google, just so you can see it, if this is my title on my page, Mac keyboard shortcuts and keystrokes, Dan Rodney. Let's go ahead and go to Google and search for what most people search for, Mac keyboard shortcuts. All right, so here's Apple. Oh, here we go. And look at what it says. Mac keyboard shortcuts and keystrokes, Dan Rodney. That is the exact title that I have on my website. So what you're seeing here is the title of your page being displayed in Google. So that's why you always want to have a good title for each page. Each page will have a different title that people in Google are going to see, and then you also want to have a heading that users are going to see when they actually come to your web page. So all of that is good essential stuff that you're going to want to have. There are going to be some additional tags that you're going to want to include. If I hop back over to my presentation here in Chrome, on the next screen, I've included all the standard HTML code that you're going to want to include. And I'm just going to grab all of this top stuff here. Just going to copy and paste that in here and just replace this. I'm not going to go through all of this in detail because, again, I wanted to keep it simple. But in short, there's a language attribute here, and the language attribute says what language this page is written in, things like English or Espanol if you're writing in Spanish, and that's useful for browser pronunciation. So if a screen reader is reading this web page to someone, it'll know how to pronounce things properly. Also for if the page was going to hyphenate or do things like that, it would be useful for the page to know what language it is. This tells the document what kind of version of HTML you're using. So it used to be that this doc type tag was much longer. It would say HTML4. There was HTML4 strict, transitional. There was all different ones. It was hard to even remember the length of that string was very long, and it was hard to remember exactly how to type it. And starting with HTML5, they said, let's simplify all of this stuff here. The idea being that as we get new versions of HTML, so there was HTML3, HTML4, then HTML5, we wanted to be able to tell the browser which version of HTML we were using. So if things changed, we could kind of opt into the new way of the browser rendering. So technically, browsers can render your web page in different ways. Crazy to think about that. It can render old web pages under old sets of rules and new versions of web pages under new sets of rules. You just have to tell it what type of document you're writing. Is it a new version or an old version of HTML? Now you might notice that it doesn't actually say HTML5. Starting with HTML5, they said, what if we could just create this thing that we're going to call the living standard? And it's just going to be this evolving, living thing that just we keep adding features, we keep adding new things, and instead of making people go back and change this document type on every single page they ever made. Let's just have it this version, and they just automatically get all the new features. It's a great idea because now we don't have to change this every single time. As long as you have this document type, you'll get all the latest and greatest and most modern rendering of your web page. Hopefully this is going to be how it goes from now on, but who knows if they'll change the rules later on. But for right now, this is what you want to put in the top of every web page to make sure that you're getting all the latest and greatest that the browser offers. This little thing right here, make sure that it doesn't mess up special characters. And this tag right here makes sure that the web page is going to be displayed at the correct size on mobile phones, tablets, desktops, and everything in between. So if we were spending more time, I would go in more depth into exactly what all these things are. But for right now, I'm just going to copy and paste them in there just to keep things simple again for today. All right. So let's save that. When I come back to the browser here, we're not really going to see really anything change by me putting that stuff in there. But as you get to more advanced stuff, those things would make a difference, and they're definitely important to always have in every web page that you do. All right, so let's keep going here. I've got my content in here, but now I need to bring, actually I don't have all my content. I don't have my images. So let's bring in some images here. All right, so I've got, and this should be a paragraph of text here. And by the way, this might be, since these are different links, you might want to do something like this to kind of format your links in your navigation. Like if you like how that looks in the code. What's interesting about this is when you are, let's put this down here, when you're putting breaks in your code, those breaks don't make it into the final web page because you're just formatting your code to make it look nice. If you think it's easier to read things this way than it is on one line, you can format these things however you want. When I come back in later and put links to each of these lines is going to get longer. And so it might actually be nice to format things this way. What actually hits return in the browser is the paragraph tag itself. So hitting return in your code just formats it nicely so that you can understand your code. If I select all this text here and I use my tab key to push the text in or my shift tab to pull it back out, whether it's indented or not, all that kind of white space and the returns, none of that matters as far as the final web page is concerned. The only thing the web browser cares about are tags. That's what it's going to listen to. All right, so now I've labeled all my stuff. It's all paragraphs or headings, and I have one last piece of content that I need to bring in, my 2 images. So I need to bring in an image up here for my logo, and for that I have an image tag. Now this is one of the tags that we're not going to have an ending tag for. If I try to end it, you'll notice it doesn't want to end the image tag. And the reason for that is because the idea of marking something up, what would you put in here to say like this is an image? There's no image there. I can't put an actual image here in code. Code is just text files. I can't directly put the image into this file because it's just plain text. I could link to the file and say, go find this other file and display it, but I can't actually directly embed the image into this page as far as this actual HTML document. So the image tag does not have an ending tag. On the image tag itself, we add attributes. Attributes are like these things where you have the name of a tag, an attribute equals some value in quotes. So the image tag always has a source attribute. So you put a space between the image tag name and the attribute. So you say the attribute equals and then some value in quotes. So I'm going to go and I want to link to the image that we have. Now for linking, you have to understand the relationship of your file and how do you find the other files. When you link from one place to another, you link by relative paths. You're going to link from where you are into some other place. If I simply said logo.gif, which is the name of the file, it would not be able to find that because it's not in the same folder. When we're in index.html, it looks around the same folder. It looks for logo.gif. It doesn't see it. and therefore we're going to get an error. It's not going to work. We can try it, but we get a missing image. It doesn't know how to find it. We need to say, hey, go into the images folder and then find logo.gif. So if we're in index.html and we say look for the images folder, it will find it because that's in the same folder. So we can say images/logo.gif. So this says go into the images folder and then find this file. Great. Now when I hit refresh, now I can find that image. Now anytime you have an image, you want to put some alt text as well. And this is going to be for anybody that is visually impaired or potentially blind. If they want to have the web read to them instead of viewing that web page, the alt text will be read when they cannot see that image. It might also be displayed while the image is loading. Once the image is loaded, the alt text will no longer be visible. But the main reason to add alt text is for accessibility, for those that are vision impaired or blind. Also, Google does also use this. So a search engine might know what this image is better through its alt text, but the main reason to do it is for usability purposes. So I would say Dan Rodney, because that is what the logo is. It actually says Dan Rodney. So I'd want them to hear Dan Rodney if they could not see that image. Okay. Then down below, I want to insert one more image. So I'm going to use my image tag. I'm going to add my source attribute. And before I forget as well, I'm going to make sure I add my alt attribute as well. So what's the source? Well, let's take a look at my files. I'm in the index. I need to say go into the images folder and find home.jpg. So go into the images folder and find home.jpg. I'm ignoring all the helpful hints that my code editor is giving me because I want to focus on what we're writing and not using any particular code editor's helpful features. But once you get used to it, you certainly can. Like in this case, I have an add-on for Sublime Text that's giving me hints. I can actually start to just return, and it automatically types it out. So that's great. It's definitely good to use your code editor's features. But right now, for today, I don't want to focus on an app. I want to focus on the code that we're writing. And this is for the home page. Let's save this file and hit refresh. So this is a laptop with a notebook and camera. So this is a laptop on a desk with a notebook, headphones, and camera. So that would be a good description that if you could not see this photograph, if you heard that, then you would know what this image is all about. So you don't see it, but it's not meant for you to see. It's meant for people to hear if they cannot see this image well. Okay. So now I've got all the content. It's not styled properly, but I've got all the content. So now I need to style all of this and make it look good. Let's go through and style things like headings and subheadings and paragraphs. And for that, I will reference my design that I had in Photoshop. Let's start with the paragraphs. So I'm going to go to my type tool and select some text to see. Okay, so I was doing Arial, 15 pixels. And if I look here, 15 pixels is the size, and the space between lines, or not necessarily space between lines, but the leading, as they call it in Photoshop, in line height, as they call it in web design, that is 28 pixels. So the space, the size from one line to the next, that's 28 pixels. So 15 over 28, I need to remember that. So let's go ahead and start styling the page. Now, where we put our CSS is in multiple locations. We can put our CSS in different places. CSS is how we style things. So it is the companion language that's going to go with our HTML, and it's going to do the styling. You can make this a separate linked document that you can share with your whole website, and that's definitely a recommended practice. But to keep things really simple here today, I'm just going to put it in the head section here. I'm going to create a style tag, which is going to say, here's the start of my styles. I'm going to end the tag to say that's the end of the styles. And inside that, I'm going to write all of our styles. We're putting it here in the head because we want the page to think about this as it's downloading the page. We want to remember these styles so that when it gets to actual paragraphs and headings, it will know how to display those properly. In the style tag, even though the style tag itself is HTML, what's in there is no longer HTML. We're now writing CSS. CSS follows a slightly different syntax. We're referring to HTML elements, but we're not creating them. So for all paragraphs, I can simply say P to reference paragraphs. I'm not creating a paragraph like I do in HTML. I'm just referring to paragraphs. So P refers to the paragraph tag, and this will style all paragraph tags. I then put in a set of curly braces that's going to contain all the styling that I want to do to paragraphs. So what do I want to do? I want to set the font size to 15 pixels is what I remember in Photoshop. And I want to set the line height to 28 pixels, which is what I remember from Photoshop. So notice that these CSS properties are written as the name of the property, colon, some value, and then a semicolon. The reason for the semicolon is because you can put multiple ones of these on a line, and it wants to know when this one is done to move on to the next. I think it's easier to read when we put these onto two different lines, of course. This is very similar in concept to an attribute equals a value in quotes. It's just not the attribute equals a value in quotes. It's still a property name and a value. We're just not separating with the equals and the quotes. We're using the colon to separate the property name from the value. And then this semicolon is ending that property statement before it goes to the next property statement. It does not matter the order you put these in. If you want to put the line height first and you want to put font size after, that will work perfectly fine. It does not matter what the order is. So I'm just going to save that, come back to my browser and hit refresh. And now I've got slightly smaller size. The default font size of paragraphs is 16 pixels. So this actually shrinks the text down just a little bit, but it increases the space between the lines. I do want a different color as well, also a different font, but let's do the color here. So here I've selected this, and over here I have color. You can see that over here in the properties panel of Photoshop. You can also see it up here as well, in this little color box right there. You can click on either that or this color box right there. And as you choose a color in Photoshop, there's going to be this code equivalent called a hex code or a hex value. And that is the code equivalent of that color. So this is the color that I want. So I'm going to copy that hex code and put it into my code. So I'm going to say color is that value. And if whatever program you're coming from does not put the hashtag, you do need to put a hashtag. When we were in Photoshop, their color picker had the hashtag right there, but they don't include that when you're copying and pasting it. So we always need to have the hashtag there. I can save that, come back to my browser, hit refresh, and now all the paragraphs are gray. Let's keep going on. Before we do the fonts, we're going to do the other headings, and then we'll come back and we'll do the font in just a moment. But let's do the heading 1. Let's take a look at how I want that to look. Okay, so this is going to be, again, the Arial font. We'll come back to that in a moment, but we want the 25 pixels in size, and the color is going to be this color. So I'm going to copy that. So 25 pixels. I'm going to remember that. I'm going to make another style, heading 1, like this, and say the font size is, I already forgot, 25. 25, and the color is hashtag, and I'm going to paste in what I copied from Photoshop. So now we have the right size and the right color. I'm going to go back over and hit refresh. It's getting there. Now, in Photoshop, all my text was uppercase. It is not uppercase right now. It's upper and lowercase. I'd like to convert that all to uppercase, but using CSS as a style. Now, let's say you don't know how to do that, and you're not sure. What do we do? Well, we can go onto Google and look for things. So on Google, we can say CSS, because I know I want to use CSS to style it, and I can say all caps. And let's just click on the first link that we get here. Scroll down here. So we see lowercase, uppercase. Oh, that makes things all caps. Okay, let's try to find an example of the code. So this one makes something lowercase. This one wants to make something uppercase. Oh, okay. Now this is doing it to paragraphs, but I want to do it to something else. But this is the property and the value. Great. Let's just take this and copy that and go back into my text editor here, my code editor, and paste that in. Looks the same format. It is a property and a value. Great. Okay. So now we can save that. Come back and hit refresh, and look at that. It works. Now, of course, I knew what that code was, but I just want to show you that once you understand the base syntax of how to write things, like once you understand how to target an element and what various properties kind of do and how to write a property, it's easy to go and learn another property and go find that. So if you ever get stuck, you don't know how to do something, Google's your friend. You can find a lot of information. It's hard to learn coding from the very beginning by using Google, but once you know how to write a language, once you know the basic syntax, learning additional things by looking for that particular topic, that is something that's much more doable. It's just the learning the base language that helps having somebody walk you through to get started. That's going to really help a lot. Okay, so one more thing here, the subhead right here. So that's Arial 21, and that's just the standard black. So just 21 pixels. So I'm going to make the heading 2s a font size of 21 pixels. So I've got the right size, color, uppercase for all of these, but I want to set the font for all of them. In my Photoshop design, all of this stuff is Arial, and I want to change the whole page to Arial. The reason I was waiting to do this is because I don't want to have to go and say Arial, Arial, Arial over and over again. I want to do it for the whole page. So what we can do is all of the stuff that I have is sitting inside the body tag. If you target the parent element, so we have this parent-child relationship. So these things are inside the body. So if you think about like a pregnant mother, the child is inside the body of the mother. So this is the parent and this is the child. Children are inside the parent element. And so if you style the parent, that will affect all the children inside of that parent element. So I can make a rule up here for the body, and then everything inside that body tag is going to get that formatting. So I can set the font family, and I can say Arial, and then I can go back, and everything in the body is going to be Arial. I don't have to go element by element, formatting them all. Everything inside got that. Great. Now, what if they don't have Arial? It's a standard font that most people should have, but what if they don't have it? We can set a first choice, second choice, third choice, etc. So you can put a comma and then give it a second choice. What if they don't have Arial? Well, then maybe Helvetica could be. What if they don't have either of those? Every computer is going to have some sort of sans serif typeface. There are different categories of fonts. There are serif fonts and sans serif fonts. Serif are the little decorative feet that are normally on fonts like the default font, which is Times Roman. Sans means without. So this would be a font without those little decorative components. And that's the kind of general category of font that I'm going for here. So even if they don't have the first two, they'll get some sort of generic sans serif, whatever is installed on their machine. Just as a reminder, you can do custom web fonts, even though we're not doing that today. You can totally bring your own fonts and tell it to use those, but you can't just type in the name of any font in here and have it work. It might work on your computer, but that doesn't mean that it's going to work on everybody else's computer. So for example, if I type in hobo, that's a font. If you know it, you might be laughing right now. It's a real font. Doesn't work on my machine because I don't have Hobo installed, but if you had Hobo installed and you viewed this web page, you would see it in Hobo. So if you're really doing custom web fonts the proper way, you got to load them in and then set the font. And that's why we're not doing that today, but it's good to know that it is possible that you can do it. All right, so we've got our basic styling pretty good here. We now want to make the layout of the page better. This text is getting too wide. It's nice that it can get narrower for small screens, but it's not good that it can get too wide here. Also, when I get down to small screens, this image is forcing the web page to be bigger, and I have to side scroll. That's not very good. I want that image to be able to scale down to fit within the browser window. So we got to fix a couple things here. Let's set the width of this web page so that it doesn't get too wide. I want to set it to the width of this image. So I'm going to right click on this image or control click and open it in a new tab. So this, if I look up here at the top, it says that it's 720 pixels wide by 330 pixels tall. Cool. Okay, so 720 pixels is the width of this image. By the way, if you don't have that image in the web page itself, this is just a neat little tip that if you take a browser window and you drop an image into it, at the top, you will see how big that image is. It's just another way to open that image. You don't have to open up Photoshop and figure it out. Just a really quick way to see how big your image is. So 720 pixels. Let's make the width of the whole web page 720. I'm already saying that everything in the body should have this font. While we're doing that, I can set the width to 720 pixels, like so. Let's save and refresh. So now all my content here is limited to 720 pixels. But this isn't exactly what I want, because now it's forcing it to be 720 and it's not allowing it to be flexible for smaller screens. What I really wanted to say is that it can't be bigger than 720. The maximum width should be 720. That's going to allow the text content to be less than 720, but no more than 720. So the maximum size, so it can be smaller, but it can't be bigger. That's good. Now, when it gets smaller, the text reflows. That's good. That's what I want. But this image is still forcing the web page to be too wide. So images do not scale automatically, but we can make them scale automatically if we want. In every website you do, you will want to tell all images. So I'm going to target the image tag. Remember, the image tag is img. So all the image tags should have a max width of 100%. Now that 100% is relative to their parent element. So anything they're inside of, they cannot be bigger than their container. So if the container gets smaller, they get smaller. They cannot be more than 100% of whatever they're inside. And so now if I refresh the page, when the container is 720, the image is 720. But when the container gets smaller than 720, the image can't be bigger than 100% of that element, so the image scales up and down accordingly. But it doesn't get bigger than that container, which is nice. Okay, so that's working pretty well, except I don't like that this page has what I call stuck to the left-itis. I want the content to be centered like it is in my design here. I had more space on the left and the right hand sides, and that's how I want it to be in my browser as well. So how do we get rid of all the space over here and kind of equalize it? So I need to take half the space from here and put it over there. There's two types of spacing that we have in web pages. We have padding and margin. If you think about a box that you're going to ship out by UPS or FedEx, you put the padding on the inside of the box. If you put the bubble wrap on the outside, the FedEx guy is going to look at you pretty strangely. So padding is on the inside of the box. Margin is on the outside of the box. So all of this stuff is outside of that 720 pixel box. So this is all margin space outside. I don't know how much margin I want on the left and the right, because sometimes I need a little, sometimes I need a lot. I want it to automatically balance those out for me. So the body tag needs to have, in this case, auto margins. So it'll just automatically make the space on the left and the right equal, kind of like magic. Pretty neat. So it will automatically figure out how much margin on the left and the right is needed and keep them balanced. Now, as I get down to smaller screens, now that I don't have any margin space around the page, because by default there's a few pixels of margin space, now that's been removed and we see some extra margin when the browser is bigger than my content, but we don't see it when it's smaller. I do want some space inside my box, so I'm going to have to add some padding for those smaller screens. Maybe 20 pixels of padding would look good. So now I have some space around the content in the box. And when the box gets big enough, we still have automatic margins on the left and the right. So now I have a web page. Awesome. But I only have one. I want to create a second one and create a link so I have a full-fledged website. So let's create our second page, and then this website will be finished coding. So I'm going to take this web page that I have, and I'm going to make a copy of it. So I'm just going to copy and paste this page. And the second page, I'm going to make a contact page. So I'll call it contact.html. And I want to take both of these pages and link them to each other. So for that, I'm going to take these two pages and I'm going to open them back up with my Sublime Text. From index, I need to go to contact.html. I want to make the word contact go to contact.html. So I need to wrap a link around that word. I'm going to click contact and go to another page. So you need to wrap it in a link. Now the link tag is A for anchor. If you think about chain links, there's like links to another page. Like if you have a chaining yourself to another page, you can anchor yourself to another page. They literally would used to show in early browsers, they'd show like an actual like link icon, like an anchor icon, as in like a nautical anchor. It was kind of this loose metaphor of like anchoring yourself. Like you follow the links to this other page and where you're anchored to. They could have called it a link tag, but they didn't. So they called it the anchor tag. The anchor tag will always have an href. This is the hypertext reference. You're referencing another page of hypertext. So all images will always have a source. All links will always have an href. What other page of hypertext are we referencing? Well, we're referencing contact.html. We link to this like we link to images based on the relative location. Because index and contact are in the same folder, I can simply give it the other name. But if it were in a subfolder, you would have to write whatever the folder name is, / and then the file that you want to find. Okay, but I can just link to this like so. Now I can open that in a browser. We can open this up in our browser. All right, so here's our link that we can test out, and I can click on it and it goes to the contact page, except the contact page looks exactly like the home page. So let's hit the back button and go back and customize our contact page. So here in the contact page, I'll change the title here to Contact Dan Rodney. On the page, I want them to see here, Contact Dan Rodney, so they can see it on the web page itself. I don't really need subheadings here for this page. I don't need all this text. I can get rid of that. And I can say, Contact Dan Rodney, please email me. I am lonely. All right, so now, and also I need to change the image here. We have a contact.jpg, and the alt text for this is Dan teaching a group of students in a seminar. All right, so now I actually have a different page. So let's go back to our browser, and I can click the contact link, and now the contact page actually looks different. Yay! Now I have to be able to get back to the home page, right? Now I know, of course, I can click the back button, but what if somebody lands on the contact page? I want them to be able to click on the logo to go back to the home page. So here in my contact page, around my logo image, I can throw a link, because you can put anything that you want inside of a link tag. It can be images, it can be text. It doesn't matter if it's on multiple lines or if it's on one line. Again, HTML doesn't care whether things are on one line or not, or multiple. But every link is going to have an href, and you're going to link to the other page. Contact and index are both in the same folder, so I can simply link to index by its name, and it will be found because it's in the same folder as my current contact.html. Great, now I can save that, come back to my browser, hit refresh, and now I can click the logo to go to the home page, and I can click contact to go to the contact page. I have made a website that only I can see. Yay, I'm happy I have a website, but I want to share it with the world, of course. So right now, these the URL or address is just a local address. It's a file address, because this is a file sitting on my computer. It's good that only I could see this while I'm developing it, but ultimately I need to get a web host where I can share it with other people. Now, there are lots of web hosts out there for you to choose from. There's one that I'm going to show here. It's called a smallorange.com. I just like to go to this website here because it's very simple to show their hosting plans. They're right on the homepage. I'm not necessarily saying that these are the best or anything. I like to come here because it's a very simple way to show some hosting plans. There are lots of hosts out there. I'm not going to recommend a specific one, but as an example here, with this shared plan for $8.80 a month, you get 5 gigabytes of storage. Now, if you think about images, being the biggest thing on your website, or actually videos, if you have videos, that'll actually probably be the biggest thing. But generally, images for most regular web pages are the biggest things you'll have. Those images that I created are pretty small. They were kilobytes, they weren't megabytes even, and here you're getting gigabytes. So generally for storage, you're probably fine with something like this, unless you're storing a lot of videos. And even in that case, those videos might be stored on something like YouTube, where you don't have to pay for storage of those videos themselves. When it comes to bandwidth, this is like a data plan for your website. So if you're used to your cell phone having a data plan, if you're not on an unlimited plan, if you're given a certain amount of data per month, that's what this is all about. So when someone comes to your website, let's just pretend that your web page is 1 megabyte each. So there's 1,000 megabytes in a gigabyte. So that's 50,000 page views every single month. If you have, all right, what's that? Yeah, 50,000 page views per month. So it's a lot of page views. You're going to have a lot of visitors that can come and view your website. If you exceed that, you can always pay for additional bandwidth. And if you're getting a lot of people coming to your website, hopefully you're monetizing them somehow so that you can afford to pay for a little bit more bandwidth. So generally, if you're hitting a lot of bandwidth, that's a good problem to have, because it just means a lot of people are coming to your website, and hopefully there's some opportunity for you to make money. This particular plan allows you to host unlimited domain names. Now, a domain name is your .com name, like nobledesktop.com, asmallorange.com, danrodney.com. Those are different domain names. You will have to purchase those domain names separately, and you generally pay a yearly fee for those, whether you're paying a company like a Small Orange for that domain name, or a different company like GoDaddy or Namecheap.com. You can always get a domain name from anybody. It doesn't have to be the same company that's hosting your website, but that you can basically host as many websites as you want for this $8.80 a month. Some plans will limit how many domain names you can host on them, but even if they say unlimited domains, it doesn't mean that they're giving you the domain names for free. You're just getting the hosting of those. So you can host as many websites as you want. You get a certain amount of storage, a certain amount of bandwidth, but you will need to pay separately for those domain names. Generally, domain names, if it's a regular .com address, somewhere between $10 and $20 a year for that domain name. So if you're talking about $8.80 a month times 12, so roughly about $100 plus $10 to $20 a month, a year for the domain name. So let's say plus 20, so around $100 something, $125 per year for a plan like this. There definitely are cheaper hosts and more expensive hosts depending on your needs, but this kind of gives you an idea of kind of middle ballpark kind of pricing for your more affordable hosting. Depending on your needs, you can always scale up from here, or maybe even save a little bit of money if you don't need as much as this offers. Once you sign up for a plan, whether it's this company or another company, you're basically going to tell them what domain name you either already own or what domain name you want to purchase. Assuming that domain name is available to get, you will be then paying yearly for that domain name. That will be one charge. And then you'll be paying monthly for the hosting. Some hosts will give you a discount if you pay upfront for the entire year. That depends on the host. So just mentally, just keep in mind that domain names and web hosting are two different things. And even though the same company could offer both of them, it could also be offered by two different companies. So if you already have a domain name purchased through GoDaddy or Namecheap or some company, and you've been just holding it, waiting to get a website going, and now you're finally getting your hosting set up, you could always choose a different web host. It doesn't have to be the same company that's hosting the domain name itself. A domain name is essentially a pointer that points to a web host. So as long as you update that domain name to point to the right host, they can be two different companies. Once you have that plan set up, you're going to have a domain name and you're going to have a hosting plan, and they're going to have a place where you can log into your account. Sometimes this is called a cPanel or control panel, and that's a place where you can find out all the information about your hosting. Somewhere in there, there's going to be FTP information. FTP stands for File Transfer Protocol, and that FTP information is how you're going to copy your files to the web server. File Transfer Protocol is fancy words for copy files over the internet. That's what we're going to do. We do need a program that's going to allow us to copy the files, to FTP the files, and for that I like to use a free program called CyberDuck. Now, when you're downloading CyberDuck, you do just have to be careful about the ads that they have on their website. Please don't click their ads. I have a, let me disable ad block on here just so you can see what this looks like. A lot of times there's going to be an ad right here. Please do not click that download button. I have no idea what you're going to download if you download this thing, some network monitor. I blame Google for, see how it says ad right there? I blame Google for allowing download buttons to be in ads. In my opinion, an ad should never have a download button. There's just no need for that. So please do not click that. I've seen all sorts of different apps try to put it there. They're just trying to fool you into getting something you do not want. Over here are the legitimate download buttons where you can download for Mac or Windows. Use that and you will be fine. So if you click on that, then you can download for Windows or for Mac OS, and those are the legitimate download buttons there. Make sure you use that. Okay, so otherwise, this is a free FTP program that you can get. If you like them, you can donate and give them some money. But technically, it's a free app that you can use, and it's a nice little FTP app that you can easily copy up your files to your web server. So I've already downloaded and installed that. So here is CyberDuck ready to go, and I have my local files. I've already set up my web hosting, so I'm ready to upload my file. Now, I'm going to go to the website itself. For demonstration purposes, we use the jivefactory.com. Now, this is a fictional website that we put up here. It's not a real thing. Don't try to go to this place. It doesn't actually exist. It's just a fictional site. I don't want to actually replace the jivefactory.com, the full website here, but I'm going to work in a folder called Rockstar in here. So pretend that this is just like the plain jivefactory.com. Don't worry about it being in a folder. Everything's going to work exactly the same way, even though I'm in a folder. It just allows us to pretend as though we're on a different website without having to purchase a whole separate hosting package and domain name. So just pretend I'm on the jivefactory.com. For all intents and purposes, it's basically the same thing. I uploaded this earlier just to say hello to everybody, and this is the web page that I'm going to replace with the one that I made. So I go to my CyberDuck program here, and I open a connection to my server. Now, normally, this is going to be something like ftp.yourwebsite.com. So in this case, it's ftp.thejivefactory.com. But you're going to find this information out once you've signed up for your hosting and you've logged into your account. Somewhere in your account, you should be able to find the FTP information. If you can't find it for some reason, contact your host. Do a live chat, call them up, email them, whatever you need to do. They should be able to direct you to where you find this information. But you basically need the server name, the username, and the password. So we are rockstar at thejivefactory.com. And I've already done this before, so it remembers my password on my particular computer. That's all I need. Address, username, and password, and I'm in. Now, here is the current index.html, the one that you're seeing right here in the browser. I can now go to my desktop and I can copy the files from my desktop, the ones that I've been working on, the images and the HTML. I can copy them up to my server through CyberDuck. So this folder right here is on the web server. It's basically just a computer with a folder, and I put my stuff in it. I drag my files over onto the CyberDuck window. There's already an index.html there, so it offers to overwrite that file. See, this is the overwriting file. I'm going to say continue to go ahead and overwrite that with the new version. It takes a moment to upload it, and it's done. When I come back to the browser and hit refresh, I see my website, and everything works on here like it did locally. So I can click contact to go to that page. I can go back to the home page. I've got a working website that anybody could see. Pretty awesome. Now, this is now a copy of my website. I have the one that's on my FTP server, and I still have the one that's on my computer. If in the future, if I make changes, keep in mind that you have two versions, the local one and the remote one. That's the local is your computer and the remote is the web server. So if you make a change, it's always a good idea to do the change locally so you can make sure that it's good. So let's say the contact page. I say contact Dan Rodney, please send work. I had a baby. Need the money. So let's say I save that change. When I'm back in my browser, do we think the live website has changed? No, because I did that change locally. If I look at my local file, that has changed. When I hit refresh, I see that change. That's good that I can test out my files locally, make sure they're good. If I made a mistake, I can fix it. Once it's good, I can then make it live by uploading it to the FTP site. So now that I know it's good, I can re-upload just the contact page because that's the only one that I updated. I could just drag that up to the server. It'll ask to overwrite the one that's currently there. Yes, go ahead and do that. And now I've updated the live website. If I go back to the live website and hit refresh, now I see that change has been made. Now, let's say you're inheriting a site from somebody else. They say, hey, can you update my website? You say, yes, just give me the username and password and your FTP address, and I'll be able to log in and download the files from your website. So imagine that scenario. Here, maybe I'm on my desktop and I create a folder for the client website. I don't have any of the files locally because I'm just getting the website from the client that has hired me. Once you log into the website through CyberDuck, because they gave you the FTP address, username and password, you have the authority to log in. You can then take those files and you can download them to your computer. And once they're down on your computer, now you can start to edit them, change them, do whatever you want, test them in your browser. When everything's good, you can just re-upload the files that you've changed, and you just updated someone else's website. I'll never forget the first time where I actually made a website and I uploaded it and I thought, I made that. And it was just an awesome feeling. I'll never forget. It's just very empowering to realize that once you understand how this stuff works, you can make and update websites whenever you want. And it's just to be able to be in control of your own website like that. It's just an awesome ability that I think anybody can have if you just put your mind to it and that you want to learn these things. So that wraps up the main things that I wanted to show today. Of course, there's lots more that you can learn with HTML and CSS. So we do have additional ways that you can learn this stuff. We teach classes in New York City, but almost all these coding classes can also be done live online. We do run the classes in New York time, that's Eastern time, but if you can attend live and watch those classes, you can screen share into the instructor computer and watch them if you're not in the New York area. If you're in the New York area, come to Noble Desktop in person, take our live instructor-led classes. All of our classes come with step-by-step workbooks, which are very much like the exercise that we have in the beginning of this slideshow. If I go back to the first screen, don't forget that there's a download exercise PDF on the first screen of this slideshow. But if you want to learn more, if you want a whole program, we have a front-end web development program that goes into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and all of those front-end coding languages. There's a compare feature on all of these certificates, so you can compare the differences between these certificate programs. We have the front-end, web design plus WordPress, and full stack. Basically, the difference between front-end and the rest is front-end is all your fundamental languages, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And then in web design, you add in Photoshop for doing websites and also HTML email. Technically, that's not websites, but a kind of a well-rounded web designer can create web pages and HTML email. HTML email uses HTML and CSS, but there are some slightly different rules that apply to emails when compared to web pages. So once you learn a few more things, you can create web pages and you can create emails and web graphics using Photoshop. The web design plus WordPress and PHP shows you how to use WordPress and PHP. As I mentioned earlier, WordPress is the most popular content management system. It drives about a third of all websites on the web, so it is very, very popular. Our last option here is what's called a full stack. That is front and back end. It's a different back end though. Instead of using WordPress and PHP, instead we're using Ruby on Rails. Ruby on Rails is very popular for creating web apps or any sort of kind of more complex functionality. Originally, Twitter was built with Ruby on Rails. So if you want to create more complex logic-based websites, Ruby on Rails is a great framework to do for that. The nice thing is if you're not sure what you want to get started with, you can start with something small. Start with something like front end. You can always add additional courses if you want to learn any of these other things. So you could always start with front end and then see how it goes. And if you want to learn some back end, you could always add the Ruby on Rails class and you end up getting a certificate in full stack. To get the price, you do have to register for that certificate program up front. But let's say you do the front end certificate, you could always add the additional classes. You'll end up earning that certificate, although you might not get that particular certificate price. You do get the certificate price for whichever certificate you sign up for. So if you think there's a good chance that you really want to do the full stack, try to decide that at the beginning, because you will get the best price if you sign up for the certificate upfront. If you kind of do it a la carte and you kind of mix and match the classes that you want, you don't get as much of a discount as when you do the certificates. You can take the individual courses that make up the certificate if you just want to learn a couple things here or there. If you just want to get started a little bit, for example, just learning some very basic things in a hands-on environment, we have an intro to HTML and CSS. This is a 3-hour hands-on class where you'll actually do coding exercises yourself. If you're coming to New York City, you're learning in our hands-on learning center in New York City, where you come into a classroom with an instructor. If you choose to do it online, you can screen share in and hear the instructor speaking through their microphone if you choose to do it online. So this is the first 3 hours of our web development level 1. So if you want more than 3 hours, if you really want to dive in more to learning HTML and CSS, this is a great first course. It's an 18-hour course, and it gets you started with HTML, CSS, and uploading files to your website. This is actually the first course in our certificate program. So all those certificate programs start with this particular course. The individual courses in our certificate programs can be taken separately. If you put it together and you take it as part of a certificate program, then of course you get bigger discounts when you take it as part of the certificate program. I hope this has been helpful, and hopefully we will see you in a class in the future, and best wishes in getting started in web design. Hope this was helpful for you.